I never expected that a grande, two-pump, non-fat, extra hot vanilla latte would change my life. It was my order, my ritual, the one constant in a freelance career that felt like trying to build a sandcastle against a rising tide. For 3 years, that coffee order was the anchor of my day, and the man who made it was the quiet, unattainable center of my world. His name was Julian. I learned it from his name tag, a small, black rectangle with white, unassuming letters. Julian. The name felt like him, solid, classic, calm. He worked the morning shift at the Daily Grind, the coffee shop that served as my unofficial office. He was a constant, a landmark in the shifting topography of my solitary life. I knew his schedule better than my own deadlines. Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays, from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. Wednesdays were his day off, and my Wednesdays were always a little grayer, the coffee from whoever replaced him never tasting quite right. He was, to put it simply, a work of art. The kind you see in a museum, cordoned off by a velvet rope, a thing of beauty to be admired from a safe and respectful distance. He was tall, with shoulders that seemed built to carry more than just a tray of coffee mugs. His arms, often dusted with a fine layer of cocoa powder or stray coffee grounds, were etched with lean muscle, the kind that came not from a gym, but from a life of doing, of lifting and carrying and making. His hands were large and capable, and I often found myself mesmerized by the way they moved, the deft twist of the portafilter, the steady pour of steamed milk creating a perfect rosetta on the surface of a latte, the casual way he'd wipe down the counter. It was a ballet of quiet competence. His voice was the foundation of my mornings. It was a low, pleasant rumble, a sound like stones settling at the bottom of a river. It never rose in frustration, even when the line was out the door and the espresso machine was screaming. He'd call out the orders, his tone even and clear. Grande latte for Sarah, iced Americano for Mark, and my personal favorite, my daily benediction, grande, two-pump, non-fat, extra hot vanilla latte for Leo. He always remembered my name. He always remembered my order. It was a small thing, a professional courtesy, but to me, it felt like a secret acknowledgement, a tiny thread connecting my lonely island to his bustling mainland. This admiration was my secret, a carefully curated collection of observations stored in the locked gallery of my mind. I knew the way his dark hair curled just behind his ears when it got a little too long. I knew the specific shade of green his eyes turned in the morning light that streamed through the shop's big front window. I knew he had a small, faded scar just above his left eyebrow that was only visible when he frowned in concentration. I knew the scent that clung to him was a mix of dark roast coffee, sweet vanilla syrup, and something else, something clean and uniquely his, like fresh soap and sawdust. I built walls around this secret, reinforcing them with logic. He was a barista. I was a customer. It was a professional relationship, nothing more. His kindness was part of the job description. And the biggest wall, the one made of solid, unbreachable granite. He was, presumably, straight. I'd seen him talking and laughing with female customers, a warm, easy smile that never reached his eyes the way it did when he was focused on his work. I'd constructed an entire narrative for him. A girlfriend, probably a dog, a life filled with friends and weekend barbecues, and all the normal, happy things that felt a million miles away from my own quiet, ordered existence. He was a painting on the wall, and I was just a visitor in the museum. You don't touch the art. My life was a fortress of routine. I woke at the same time, followed the same path to the coffee shop, sat at the same small table in the corner, and worked on my graphic design projects until my laptop battery warned me it was time to go home. It was a safe life, a predictable life, a lonely life. Julian was the one beautiful, chaotic variable I allowed myself to observe from behind the safety of my screen. He was a splash of vibrant color in my grayscale world, and I was content, or so I told myself, to simply watch him from a distance. I never imagined the storm that was coming, the one that would shatter the glass and tear the painting right off the wall. It started as a whisper, a graying of the sky, a restlessness in the air that promised more than just a summer shower. The weather app on my phone had been issuing warnings all morning, using words like unprecedented and severe. I, in my usual bubble of focused work, had mostly ignored them. To me, It was just background noise, a distant rumble that had nothing to do with the precise alignment of text and image on my screen. But then the whisper became a roar. The sky outside the coffee shop window turned a bruised, sickly shade of purple-green. The wind began to howl, rattling the large panes of glass in their frames. The first drops of rain were fat and heavy, hitting the pavement with audible splats. Within minutes, it was a deluge. The street became a river, a churning brown current that swallowed the curbs and began to creep up the tires of parked cars. The lights in the shop flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging us into a sudden, eerie twilight. A collective gasp went through the handful of remaining customers. The comforting hum of the refrigerators and the hiss of the espresso machine were replaced by a tense silence, punctuated only by the drumming of the rain and the howl of the wind. My laptop screen was a lonely beacon of light. I saw Julian move from behind the counter, his silhouette calm and steady against the violent backdrop of the storm outside. "All right, folks," he said, and his rumbling voice cut through the anxiety in the room, a reassuring anchor in the chaos. "Looks like we've lost power. For safety, I'm going to have to close up. The weather is getting pretty bad out there, so please be careful getting home." Panic, cold and sharp, pricked at my insides. Home was a 20-minute walk away, a walk that now seemed impossible. The street was already flooding. My building was old, prone to power outages even in mild storms. My carefully ordered world was being washed away. I started packing my laptop, my movements jerky and clumsy. My mind was racing, trying to calculate a new routine, a new plan, but coming up with nothing but static. The other customers, grumbling and pulling up hoods, made a dash for the door, disappearing into the gray sheet of rain. Soon, it was just me and Julian. I was fumbling with my laptop cord, my fingers feeling thick and useless. "Hey," his voice was closer now. I looked up. He was standing on my side of the counter, no longer a barista, but just a man, looking at me with a concerned expression. That little scar above his eyebrow was visible. "You okay? You look a little spooked." "I'm fine," I lied, my voice sounding thin. "Just didn't expect this." "None of us did," he said, glancing out the window. The wind slammed a sheet of water against the glass. "Where are you headed?" "Just a few blocks over," I said, trying to sound casual. "On Elm." He frowned. "Elm Street floods first. You're not going to make it walking, man. It's not safe." He was right. I knew he was right. The water was already halfway up the door. My fortress was gone, and I was stranded. A wave of helplessness washed over me. I just stood there, laptop bag in hand, a refugee in my own neighborhood. Julian was quiet for a moment, just watching me. I couldn't read his expression in the dim light. I felt exposed, my usual composure stripped away by the storm. I was no longer just Leo, the quiet customer at the corner table. I was just Leo, scared and trapped. Then he said the words that changed everything. "Listen, this is going to sound weird, but I live upstairs, above the shop. The power's probably out up there too, but at least it's dry. You can wait out the storm there if you want. Better than trying to swim home." The offer hung in the air between us, a lifeline I was terrified to take. My mind screamed 1,000 different things at once. "No, that's too much. You can't impose. It's weird. He's just being polite. Say no, thank him and leave." But my mouth, for once, didn't listen to my anxious brain. "Okay," I heard myself say, the word a small, quiet surrender. "Yeah, okay, thank you." Julian nodded, a small, relieved smile touching his lips. "Good. Come on." He locked the front door, the click of the deadbolt sounding unnervingly final. He led me through the dark, silent shop, past the familiar counter that had always served as our barrier, and through a door at the back I'd never noticed before. The door to his world. The storm raged outside, but inside, a new, much quieter one was just beginning. The air in the stairwell was different. The rich, warm scent of coffee and baked goods from the shop below gave way to something cooler, older. It smelled of dust and old wood and the faint, lingering aroma of rain-soaked coats. It was a liminal space, a passage from the world where I knew the rules to one where I was completely lost. My hand trailed along the cool, painted brick wall as I followed Julian up the narrow, creaking steps. Each step felt momentous, carrying me further away from the safety of my routine. He unlocked a door at the top of the stairs, and we stepped into his apartment. It was small, a simple studio layout, and steeped in a dim, gray light from a single large window that overlooked the rain-lashed street. The power was out here, too. The only sounds were the storm outside and the frantic, hammering beat of my own heart. My first impression was one of warmth, despite the lack of electricity. The space felt lived in, real. It wasn't the sterile, minimalist apartment I might have imagined. There were stacks of books on the floor, a well-worn leather armchair, and a large drafting table in one corner covered in blueprints and sketches. On the walls, instead of posters, were framed architectural drawings of old buildings. This wasn't just an apartment, it was a sanctuary. It was his. The familiar scent of coffee was gone, replaced by something far more intimate. His scent. That clean, soap-and-sawdust smell was stronger here, woven into the fabric of the couch, the pages of the books. It was everywhere. I felt like I was breathing him in, and the thought made my head spin. I stood awkwardly just inside the door, clutching my laptop bag like a shield. "It's not much, but it's dry," Julian said, his voice softer in the enclosed space. He ran a hand through his damp hair. "Make yourself at home. Seriously, let me find some candles." I watched him move through the shadows, his broad frame navigating the familiar landscape of his home with an easy grace. He was no longer Julian the barista. He was Julian, a man in his own space, and I was an intruder, a strange variable thrown into his life by the weather. The power dynamic had completely shifted. Here, I was the one who was out of my element. He returned with a couple of thick pillar candles, lighting them with a match. The small flames flickered to life, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls and bathing the room in a warm, golden glow. The soft light softened the edges of everything, making the small apartment feel even more like a cocoon, a safe haven from the raging storm. "You're soaked," he observed, looking at my damp jeans and jacket. "You can hang that up to dry. I probably have a sweater or something you can borrow, if you want. Don't want you to catch a cold." My brain stuttered. Borrow his sweater? Wear his clothes? The thought was both terrifying and intoxicatingly intimate. To be wrapped in something of his, something that carried his scent. It was too much. "I'm okay," I said quickly, maybe too quickly. "It's just a little damp." He didn't push. He just gave me a small, understanding nod. "All right. Well, sit down. Relax. Looks like we're going to be here for a while." I perched on the edge of his couch, the fabric worn and soft beneath my fingers. I set my laptop bag down carefully on the floor, a useless totem from my other life. Julian disappeared into a small kitchenette area, and I heard the clink of mugs and the sound of him pumping water from a camping jug. The quiet domesticity of the sounds was unnerving. This was a side of him I had never even dared to imagine. He came back with 2 mugs of what smelled like peppermint tea, handing one to me. Our fingers brushed as I took it. The contact was fleeting, barely a whisper of skin against skin, but it sent a jolt through me like a downed power line. It was the first time we had ever touched, not counting the transactional passing of a coffee cup or loose change. This was different. This was personal. My heart hammered against my ribs. I was hyper-aware of everything. The warmth of the mug in my cold hands, the way the candlelight caught the green in his eyes, the impossibly small distance between us on the couch. We sat in silence for a while, sipping our tea, listening to the rain. It should have been awkward, but somehow it wasn't. The storm provided a constant, overwhelming soundtrack that filled the empty spaces. It was a shared experience, a common enemy we were weathering together. "So," he said eventually, his voice a low rumble that was almost part of the storm's chorus. "Graphic designer, right? Leo?" I was startled that he remembered. "Yeah. Yes. How did you know?" A small smile played on his lips. "I see you every day, parked in that corner with your laptop. You're always so focused. I've always been curious about what you were working on." My face grew hot. He'd noticed me, not just as a customer, but as a person. The thought that while I had been secretly observing him, he had, in his own way, been observing me too, was dizzying. "It's nothing that exciting," I mumbled, looking down into my tea. "Logos. Websites. The usual. I think it's cool," he said, and he sounded sincere. "Taking ideas and making them into something real, something people can see. It's a kind of architecture." In a way, he gestured toward the drafting table in the corner. "That's what I wanted to do. What I'm still trying to do. I looked over at the table, at the precise, beautiful drawings. You're an architect? He gave a short, self-deprecating laugh. An aspiring one. I went to school for it, but life happened. This, he said, gesturing vaguely to encompass the coffee shop downstairs, pays the bills while I work on my portfolio. Someday, maybe. There it was. A crack in the perfect, confident facade I had built for him. A glimpse of vulnerability, of a dream deferred. He wasn't just the effortlessly competent barista. He was someone with his own hopes and his own disappointments. In that moment, he ceased to be a painting in a museum and became something infinitely more dangerous, a real person. My carefully constructed walls began to crumble, washed away by the rain and the quiet intimacy of his confession. The admiration I had kept at a safe distance began to morph into something deeper, something that felt terrifyingly like connection. Hours bled into one another, marked only by the deepening darkness outside and the slow burning of the candles. The storm showed no signs of letting up. The rain was a constant, hypnotic drum against the roof, a sound that insulated us from the rest of the world. We talked. For the first time, we actually talked. Not about coffee orders or the weather, but about real things. I learned that the blueprints on his wall were of historical buildings he hoped to help restore one day. He learned about the frustrating client I was dealing with, and he listened with a genuine interest that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in a long time. We talked about books we'd read, movies we loved, the strange and winding paths our lives had taken to bring us to this small, candlelit room. With every shared story, every quiet laugh, the space between us on the couch seemed to shrink. I was acutely aware of his physical presence, the solid warmth of him radiating just inches from my own body. I could smell the peppermint from his tea, the waxy scent of the burning candles, and that underlying, clean scent that was just him. My senses were overwhelmed. My fortress of solitude had been breached, and its lone inhabitant was panicking, thrilled and terrified in equal measure. At some point, hunger made itself known. We raided his small pantry, finding a can of soup, some crackers, and a slightly withered apple. We heated the soup in a pot on his small gas camp stove, a relic from a hiking trip. We ate sitting on the floor, our backs against the couch, the two small bowls balanced on our knees. It was the most intimate meal of my life. Sharing this simple, scavenged food in the dark felt more significant than any fancy dinner. It was survival. It was partnership. After we ate, a comfortable silence settled between us again. The adrenaline from the initial chaos of the storm had faded, leaving behind a strange, heavy tranquility. I was tired, my body humming with a nervous energy that had nowhere to go. Julian stretched, his broad back arching. The movement was so simple, so unconscious, but it pulled the fabric of his t-shirt taut across his chest, and I had to look away, my breath catching in my throat. "Well," he said, his voice a low murmur. "I don't think either of us is going anywhere tonight." He looked at me, his green eyes dark and serious in the flickering light. "The couch is pretty comfortable, but you can take the bed." "I don't mind." My heart seized. The bed. The thought of lying in his bed, surrounded by his scent, was an intimacy I couldn't even begin to process. "No," I said, shaking my head. "No, I couldn't. It's your place. I'll take the couch." "We could share," he said. The words were quiet, almost tentative, but they landed in the silent room with the force of a thunderclap. "The bed, I mean. It's a queen. Plenty of room." My mind went completely blank. All the witty retorts, all the polite deflections, all the carefully constructed social scripts I relied on to navigate the world, they all vanished. I was left with nothing but the raw, unfiltered truth of my own desire, a desire so overwhelming it felt like a physical force. I couldn't speak. I could only look at him, my eyes wide, trying to decipher the intention behind his words. Was it just a practical offer? A simple solution to a logistical problem? Or was it something more? His expression was unreadable, his face a landscape of shifting shadows. He seemed to take my silence as hesitation, or maybe rejection. "It's okay if not," he added quickly, his voice losing some of its easy confidence. "Seriously, I don't want to make you uncomfortable. The couch is fine." And in that moment of his own uncertainty, that fleeting glimpse of his own vulnerability, I found my voice. It wasn't my usual cautious, overthinking voice. It was someone else, someone braver. No, I said, my voice barely a whisper. The bed is okay. The air crackled. A silent understanding passed between us, a fragile agreement forged in candlelight and the sound of the rain. The point of no return. We had just stepped over it, together. The walk from the couch to the bed felt like crossing a vast, uncharted continent. It was only a few feet, but every step was loaded with a terrifying, exhilarating weight. Julian blew out the candles, leaving only the faint, ambient glow from the streetlights below, which had miraculously come back on, filtering through the rain-streaked window. The room was plunged into a soft, intimate darkness. He pulled back the comforter, a simple gray duvet. The sheets were crisp and cool. The scent of him rose from the pillows, that clean, soap-and-rain smell, concentrated and overwhelming. I slipped under the covers, my movements stiff and awkward. I felt like an actor in a play where I'd forgotten all my lines. I lay rigidly on my side, my back to the center of the bed, creating as much distance as possible. I could hear him moving around the room, the soft rustle of clothes, and then the bed dipped as he got in behind me. The silence was absolute, broken only by the storm and the sound of our breathing. I could feel the heat of his body across the small gulf of mattress that separated us. It was a living, breathing warmth that called to the cold, lonely parts of me. I lay there, my eyes wide open in the dark, my entire body a tightly coiled spring of want and fear. This was impossible. This wasn't happening. This was a dream I would wake from, back in my cold, empty apartment. Then I felt it. A slow, deliberate shift. The mattress creaked softly as he moved, closing the distance between us. His warmth was no longer a distant star, but a sun at my back. I held my breath, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I felt the light pressure of his hand on my shoulder, a tentative, questioning touch. It wasn't a prelude to anything more. It was just a point of contact, a silent offering of comfort. Or maybe, something else entirely. I didn't pull away. I couldn't. Instead, I found myself leaning into the touch, an unconscious, involuntary surrender. Encouraged, he shifted closer, until his chest was flush against my back. He draped an arm over my waist, his large, warm hand resting on my stomach. The contact was electric. Every nerve ending in my body caught fire. It was a simple, chaste embrace, but it was the most profoundly intimate thing I had ever experienced. He tucked his head into the space between my neck and shoulder, his breath warm against my skin. I could feel the slow, steady beat of his heart against my back, a solid, reassuring rhythm that began to calm my own frantic pulse. We lay like that for what felt like an eternity, two strangers thrown together by a storm, finding a strange and silent solace in the dark. I don't know who moved first. Maybe it was me, turning slowly in his arms. Maybe it was him, gently pulling me to face him. All I knew was that suddenly we were face to face, our legs tangled together, the space between us almost non-existent. In the dim light, I could just make out the shape of his face, the dark slash of his eyebrows, the glint of his eyes. He lifted a hand, his fingers tracing the line of my jaw with a feather-light touch. It was a question, a silent, breathless question, and with a courage I didn't know I possessed, I gave him the answer. I leaned forward, closing that last, infinitesimal gap between us. His lips were soft, hesitant at first. It wasn't a kiss of passion, but one of discovery, a slow, tentative exploration in the dark. It was gentle and questioning and achingly tender. I could taste the faint hint of peppermint on his breath. The kiss deepened, becoming more confident, more sure. It was a conversation without words, a confession of all the things we hadn't been able to say. It was the taste of rain and the feeling of shelter. It was the crumbling of my last wall, the demolition of my carefully ordered life. And in the beautiful, terrifying rubble, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. I felt like I was finally, truly home. Waking up was a slow, disorienting process. The first thing I registered was the light. It was a pale, watery gray, the kind of light that follows a storm. The second was the silence. The relentless drumming of the rain was gone, replaced by a quiet dripping from the eaves outside the window. The third, and most significant, was the warmth. I was wrapped in it, a heavy arm slung over my waist, a solid chest pressed against my back. The memories of the night before came rushing back, not as a dream, but as a series of vivid, sensory snapshots. The flicker of candlelight, the taste of peppermint tea, the shocking, electric feel of his lips on mine. My breath hitched. It was real. All of it was real. I lay perfectly still, trapped in his embrace, my mind a chaotic whirlwind of panic and elation. What now? What happened in the morning after the world had ended and been remade in the dark? There was no routine for this, no script. The arm around me tightened slightly in his sleep, and a fresh wave of terror and longing washed over me. Carefully, slowly, I untangled myself from his limbs. His breathing remained deep and even. I slipped out of the bed, my bare feet cold on the wooden floor. The apartment looked different in the morning light. The romantic, candlelit cocoon of the night before had been replaced by a small, slightly messy room. The magic was gone, and harsh reality was setting in. Julian was still asleep, a dark tangle of hair on the white pillow. He looked younger, more vulnerable. I felt an overwhelming urge to crawl back into bed, to hide in the warmth and pretend the rest of the world didn't exist. But the overthinking, anxious part of my brain was already screaming. It was a mistake, a fluke, storm-induced insanity. The words looped in my head. He was just being kind, offering comfort to a scared, stranded stranger. I had taken that kindness and twisted it into something else. I had misread everything. He was going to wake up full of regret, and I would be the source of his awkward, morning-after problem. I had not only crossed a line, but I had dynamited the entire museum. I had ruined the one good, simple thing in my life, the quiet admiration of my friendly neighborhood barista. I had to get out. I pulled on my still damp jeans and shirt, my movements frantic and silent. I felt like a thief, stealing away in the gray light of dawn. I scribbled a hasty, clumsy note on a napkin I found on the counter. Thanks for everything. I had to go. Leo. It was cowardly and inadequate, but it was all I could manage. My hand was on the doorknob when his voice, thick with sleep, stopped me cold. Leo? I froze, my back to him. I couldn't turn around. I couldn't face the regret I was sure I would see in his eyes. You're leaving? He asked. There was no accusation in his voice, just a quiet, sleepy confusion. I have to go, I said, my voice tight. Work. Deadlines. The lies felt like ash in my mouth. There was a rustle of sheets, and I knew he was sitting up. The silence stretched, thick and unbearable. I felt his gaze on my back. This was it. This was the moment he would say it was a mistake, that we should just forget it ever happened. I braced myself for the impact. Leo, wait. His voice was clearer now, more awake. We should talk. Those 4 words. The 4 horsemen of the emotional apocalypse. My stomach plummeted. I forced myself to turn around, to face him. He was sitting up in bed, the gray comforter pulled around his waist. His hair was a mess, and the scar above his eyebrow was prominent. He looked tired and nervous. I leaned against the door, my arms crossed over my chest, a pathetic attempt at self-defense. There's nothing to talk about, I said, my voice betraying me with a slight tremor. It was the storm. It was weird. Let's just forget it. I'll see you at the shop. A flicker of something, hurt, maybe, crossed his face before he masked it. He swung his legs out of bed and stood up. He was wearing a pair of gray sweatpants, and nothing else. My eyes darted away, focusing on a crack in the plaster on the wall behind him. I don't want to forget it, he said, his voice low and steady. He took a step toward me. Do you? My heart was a trapped bird, beating itself senseless against the cage of my ribs. I couldn't answer. I just shook my head, a tiny, miserable gesture. He stopped a few feet away from me. Then why are you running? Because. The word burst out of me, louder than I intended. Because this isn't real. You're just being nice. You felt sorry for me because of the storm, and I took advantage, and I've made everything weird, and I'm sorry. The words tumbled out in a rush, a confession of my own insecurity. Julian just looked at me, his expression softening. A small, sad smile touched his lips. Leo, he said, and my name on his tongue sounded like a plea. You really think I do that for every customer I feel sorry for? He took another step, closing the distance between us. He reached out, not to touch me, but just to hover his hand in the space near my arm. I wasn't feeling sorry for you. I was terrified. I stared at him, confused. Terrified? Of what? Of you, he admitted, his gaze unwavering. Of this, I've wanted to talk to you, to actually talk to you, for months. I see you come in every day, and you sit in that corner, and you have this whole world inside your head, and I've just wanted a glimpse of it. But I didn't know how. I thought you weren't interested. I thought, well, I saw you with that woman a few weeks ago, and I figured you had a girlfriend. My brain struggled to catch up. A woman? Then it clicked. My sister. She had been in town, and we'd met for coffee. That was my sister, I whispered. A wave of understanding, and something like profound relief, washed over his face. Your sister, he repeated, the words full of dawning realization. God, I'm an idiot, he let out a shaky laugh. I've been trying to work up the nerve to ask you out for 6 months, and I built up this whole story in my head that you were taken, that you were straight. The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. 6 months. While I had been sitting in my corner, admiring him from my safe distance, convinced he was a work of art in a museum, he had been on the other side of the counter, doing the exact same thing. We had been two lonely people, building walls between us out of our own fears and false assumptions. Last night, he continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, when the storm hit, and you were the only one left. I saw my chance. It was terrifying, asking you to come up here. I was sure you'd say no. And this morning, when I woke up and you were gone, I thought I'd scared you off. That I was the one who misread everything. All the air rushed out of my lungs. The anxiety, the fear, the carefully constructed narrative of my own rejection. It all dissolved, leaving behind a raw, overwhelming sense of relief. He felt it too. He had been just as scared, just as uncertain. I thought you regretted it. I confessed, my voice thick with emotion. Never, he said, his voice firm. He finally closed the last inch between us, his hands coming up to gently cup my face. His palms were warm against my skin. Leo, last night was the least regrettable thing that's ever happened to me. He leaned in and kissed me again. This kiss was nothing like the first. There was no hesitation, no question. It was a kiss of certainty, of profound relief. It was deep and sure and tasted of coffee and a new beginning. It was the sound of two separate worlds colliding and creating a new universe, just for us. It felt like coming home, for real this time. The days that followed felt like learning to breathe a new kind of air. My old routine, the one that had been my armor for so long, was gone. In its place was something new, something wonderfully unpredictable. I still went to the coffee shop, but it was different now. The counter between us was no longer a barrier, but a stage for our secret play. A simple grande, 2-pump, non-fat, extra hot vanilla latte for Leo was now laced with a hidden meaning. It was often accompanied by a slow, private smile from him that was meant only for me, a silent acknowledgement of the world we now shared. Sometimes, my cup would have a small heart drawn in the foam, a clumsy, endearing symbol that made my own heart ache with a sweet, unfamiliar joy. He would refuse my payment, waving my card away with a conspiratorial grin. It's on the house, he'd murmur, his fingers brushing mine for a moment longer than necessary. We navigated the new dynamic with a delicate, joyful caution. Our first real date was a walk through the park on a sunny afternoon, the world washed clean by the storm. Holding his hand in public for the first time felt both shockingly bold and completely natural. His large, warm hand enveloped mine, a perfect fit, a solid anchor. We talked for hours, filling in the missing pieces of each other's lives, the stories we hadn't had time for in the candlelit dark. I learned that his quiet confidence was a shield for a deep-seated fear of failure, a fear that his dream of being an architect would never come to fruition. He learned about my own anxieties, my tendency to retreat into my shell, to observe life rather than participate in it. We showed each other the vulnerable, unfinished parts of ourselves, the rough sketches and erased lines, and found not judgment, but a deep and unwavering acceptance. One evening, we were curled up on his couch, now our couch, watching an old movie. A thunderstorm rolled in, a distant cousin to the monster that had brought us together. The sky flashed, and the low rumble of thunder vibrated through the floor. I flinched, a residual echo of the panic I'd felt that night. Julian noticed. He pulled me closer, his arm a comforting weight around my shoulders. "You okay?" he asked softly. "Yeah," I said, leaning my head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. "Just memories." He chuckled, a low, warm sound. Good thing for that hurricane, huh? Otherwise, we might still be staring at each other over a latte. I smiled into his shirt. You were staring at me? Constantly, he admitted without a trace of shame. I had the viewing angle from behind the espresso machine perfected. It was pathetic. I laughed, a real, uninhibited laugh. Not as pathetic as me pretending I needed to adjust the brightness on my screen every time you walked by. We fell into a comfortable silence, the movie forgotten, the sound of the new, gentler rain a soothing backdrop. I thought about the man I was just a few weeks ago, the one who lived his life behind walls, who admired beauty from a safe distance, convinced he was unworthy of touching it. I had been so afraid of chaos, so dedicated to my orderly, predictable world. But my world hadn't been orderly, it had been empty. The storm had shattered my routine, flooded my fortress, and left me stranded. And in doing so, it had saved me. It had forced me into the path of a kind, steady man who had been just as lonely, just as scared as I was. It had taught me that the greatest risks often lead to the most profound beauty. Vulnerability wasn't a weakness, it was a doorway. Julian tilted my chin up, his green eyes soft in the dim light of the television. What are you thinking about? He asked. I thought about how his apartment no longer smelled just like him, but like us, a blend of his soap and my shampoo, his coffee and my peppermint tea. I thought about how the most terrifying night of my life had led to the most peaceful days I had ever known. I was just thinking, I said, my voice quiet but sure, that I finally got my order right.